Welcome everybody to our last talk in our short series about unlocking local action, where we're looking at how to engage local communities in climate action. And my name is Rick Casali and I'm a trustee of Carbon Copy. Please ask questions. There's a Q&A and a chat feature at the bottom of your screen. I will do my best to ask as many as I can during this session. I am delighted to have Gareth Davies with me today. Gareth wears many hats. Here's just a few, Gareth. Founding director of Aquaterra, on the board of the Scottish Renewables Forum, and a member of the Marine Energy Group, which was established by the Scottish Government. And he's here today to talk to us about Reflex Orkney, which is an incredibly exciting and very ambitious low carbon integrated energy system. So without further ado, over to you, Gareth, and let's have a whirlwind tour of Orkney.
Thank you very much, Rick, and great to be here. Thanks to Carbon Copy for the invitation to talk to you today about this very exciting decarbonisation project, Reflex Orkney. So why are we here? Reflex exists because we need to decarbonise our energy system. And in an Orkney context, this is a picture, if you like, of our energy system. And I emphasise the fact that this isn't just about electricity, this is about total energy. And the reason for that is if you look on this chart, electricity is represented just by this small amount here. And all of these other energy system components aren't supported by electricity. So what we have to do if we're thinking about decarbonisation is address this whole stack. So it's much more than just electricity. And in fact, in Orkney, we've already decarbonised electricity through local renewable power generation. We've been self-sufficient in renewable energy since 2013. So that bit's cracked. And what Reflex is trying to do is make better use of that, but also address these other parts of the energy system. But as well as that kind of molecular and electron-based transition, we're aware that to achieve the transition, we actually need to look at our whole energy system and how that's currently provided and some of the failings that frankly have existed in the system to date and how they might be addressed. So we're not just looking at the technology and the supply of energy, we're looking at the way that we as customers engage with that system and the relationship that we have with the organizations that are providing us our energy. And what we're looking at is energy as a service rather than just a commodity. And there's some interesting dynamics to that you'll see as we go through it. So this is, in a sense, an energy revolution. It's not quite evolution because we've tried evolution for a long time. This is a bit more revolutionary. It's a bit disruptive to the existing system. And at its simplest level, what we're looking to do is to digitally link generation and associated flexibility capacity to the variable demand that we have in our energy system. And to do that on a community-based level. So this isn't across the whole country at the moment. It's going from community to community and integrating those parts of the energy system through a digital medium into an integrated package. And through that integration to look at efficiency, look at cost and income distribution to help make that system fairer and to think about some of the redistribution of benefit and wealth within that system as well. So it's addressing fuel poverty issues as well and as the just transition. And one of the things that it forces you to think about, if you're thinking about the whole energy system, again, this is the point that energy isn't just about the electrons and molecules that you're buying. It's about what you do with those energy vectors as well. And so what we've calculated in Orkney is if we look at heating, if we look at electricity use, if we look at vehicle use and how we travel in and out of the islands, each of these activities has a capital sum and an operational sum, if you like. There's an amount that we spend on the energy consumption, but there's technology that we buy or we rent or we pay a ticket to use, which gets us from A to B. And if we're going to transition our existing energy system, which is dependent on carbon full systems, to something that's decarbonized, it's not just good enough to think about the fuel and the power that we use. We have to also think about the mechanisms that we use to change them. And when we look at that energy stack, what we find is that actually our personal expenditure is probably in many cases dominated by private transport. The cost of vehicles that we run and the fuel that we put in them is usually more than the other parts of the energy system we have. In Orkney, and this is a particularly Orcadian thing, is travel on and off the islands is another really expensive part of our lives, which has an energy dividend associated with it. So we need to think about those as key priorities. And although we always think about heating and use of electricity as being important, they're part of a mix. And what's important is that each community that we go and work in has a different mix. So if we look at the UK average situation, you can find this all over the internet. This doesn't really relate to our lives in our community. So if we're going to provide a community solution, we need to look at our reality, not a UK average reality. So thinking about that energy stack and the value that comes from it, if we integrate that across our households and our businesses, Orkney, as a community of 22,000, probably spends around £120 million every year on energy-related technology and services. So this is the money we spend on fuel, on electricity, but also the technology that's using those fuels and energy. And you can see below the distribution between households and businesses. And although we have about 10,000 households in Orkney and maybe 1,000 businesses, because those businesses use more energy, if you like, per unit, they're about equivalent. Our business use and our household use of energy is about the same. If we then roll that proposition and look across the UK, it suggests that there might be an energy market in total value of a staggering £324 billion. So when we're thinking about decarbonisation of that, what we're talking about is transitioning, getting on for £500 billion worth of market every year from carbon full to decarbonise, which is a huge endeavour. So Reflex is trying to start doing that on a bit-by-bit basis at a community level. So that hopefully gives you an idea of the monetary pull, if you like, that there is for this kind of change. So if we're going to achieve that kind of transition in the way that we spend that scale of money, we need to be very clear about the value that we as customers put on energy services. And what we started realizing as we looked at this for Reflex was that, yes, we have a monetary value around the cost of things, but there's actually things that are not quite monetized in the same way. So we have a technical value in terms of things like reliability, availability, and capacity. And there's also soft issues about the sense of ownership or belonging, the fact that as a community, you might move in a different direction than you would as an individual. There's elements of security and even aesthetics in terms of what will these systems look like. And of course, in a world that's just been ravaged by COVID, those thoughts of us move towards the overall sustainability of the system and thinking about building back even better than the system we had before. And so within Reflex, we're looking to think about how we as customers, how I and you as individuals value the energy services that we use across all of those elements. As well as thinking about the value, we're also thinking about the structural elements which will help us to deliver this. And what we realized early on is that if we're going to go for a community by community based model, we need to help each of those communities embrace this Reflex model and then roll it out in the right way for those communities. And so we realized that we essentially needed a two-tier system. We needed what we call Reflex Global, which is the umbrella organization, which, if you like, holds the ideas and the IP that can then flow down to each of the communities that chooses to embrace Reflex. And then each of those Reflex organizations in each community, the Reflex locals, if you like, can then fashion that package to their own needs. So in an island context like Orkney, as I've said, for example, ferry transport and air transport are going to be really important parts of what we need to look at, as well as businesses like fishing and workboats. But if we were in Perthshire or somewhere like that, it might be a totally different set of priorities that exist. So we need to think about how the Reflex model molds itself to these different geographies. So we have this two-tier system: Reflex Global, Reflex Local, and Reflex Orkney is our pilot, if you like, upon which this is being launched. And this project is being supported by UKRI through Innovate UK, and it's one of the flagship projects, if you like, that the UK are looking at in terms of decarbonising energy. So there's three strands to this project. We call them FlexiGrid, FlexiHeat, and FlexiTrans. And that reflects the fact that we're trying to address these three energy vectors at the same time. And that's one of the things that's particularly ambitious about Reflex. There's a number of areas that are ambitious about Reflex, but this is one of them. And you can see here some of the suggestions of the areas where we need to think about how we're going to supply the energy for these activities. But importantly, how do we get the technology that allows us to use decarbonized solutions rather than carbon full solutions? And so what we've built in is this idea of supporting the capital requirements for replacing technology alongside the financial transaction of using fuel and energy to support those technologies. So effectively, we have an energy bank alongside an energy utility, and we're putting those together at a community level. So the type of technologies that we're looking to introduce, for example, in FlexiGrid, include introducing battery systems within people's homes, looking at how solar and wind generation, if it's appropriate in particular settings, can be integrated into that. We're looking at the adoption of and use of smart meters, which are increasingly rolled out across the country. We're also looking at how our mobility solutions, like vehicles, if they're parked near the house, can they be used to help support the household energy demand through smart charging systems, etc. So there's a whole package of services and technology that we're looking at in terms of electricity supply to households, and also indeed looking at the ability of the household to use those solutions. In the transport sense, we're looking here at a whole plethora of opportunities. And I think one of the key things here is that we're not just focusing on bog standard, if that's the right word, EVs, you know, the Leafs and the Teslas and things like that. We're looking at that range, but we're looking at EVs in terms of both new vehicles and second-hand or used vehicles. So many of us are driving not new vehicles. And so it's impossible to expect us to change as a community from everybody having a mixture of ages of vehicles to everybody having new vehicles. It just isn't going to happen. And there's obviously people who don't have vehicles at all. So what we're looking to do is look at individual mobility solutions as well as new and used vehicles, but also look at that commercial and community fleet that provides the other services that we need. And obviously the range of options in this space is increasing almost week by week. There's a lot of news about how quickly petrol and diesel type vehicle options are going to disappear. And also we've got the autonomization of vehicles coming down the track as well. So Reflex is having to be prepared for all of those transitions at the same time and work towards decarbonization of those. And that also involves looking at charging mechanisms as well. It's absolutely critical. So looking at home charging, but also charging on the streets or at strategic locations, and thinking about those charging locations, not just as service points, but perhaps as energy hubs where there could be an amount of energy that was stored there so that it can help flex the system between demand and generation. So, we've actually launched this now in Orkney. The Reflex Orkney got launched to the public in the first week of December. There's a whole heap of communications that have gone out around that. There's some great videos online showing in particular the EVs and the different models that we're promoting. So I can direct you, if you're interested, to get more information to reflexorkney.co.uk. And there's feedback there that can be given if you're interested. Obviously, at the moment, this website is geared towards the Orkney constituency of potential customers. But through this portal, if you're expressing interest in another geography, that will filter through and we'll be able to deal with it. But you can't sign up for Reflex at the moment unless you're resident in Orkney. And the number of people that we've got in Orkney so far, we've got up to 346. In fact, we just had a meeting today, so that's now gone over 350. And you can see here the kind of things people are interested in is smart tariffs, EV leasing, battery solar solutions, EV chargers, heating, and we're looking to set up a car club as well. So we're getting a spectrum of interest, and as Reflex broadens the scope of services it can offer, obviously that mix will change as well. This point of having a membership is key actually as well, because what we wanted to do with Reflex is for people to feel that they're a part of something. It's not just something you go and take and use. We want our members of Reflex to go on that journey towards decarbonisation with us. We're going to be introducing a carbon calculator on the website so they can follow their personal performance and be a part of that carbon transition. To achieve that long-term transition, we've kicked this off with what we call Reflex Core, which is this £28 million. We get 50% of that from government. We're having to raise the match funding of 14 million to match that. But that effectively only does 10% of the job. So over a timescale of our choice, we then have to go from decarbonising 10% of our community to decarbonising 100%. And we've set our target as 2030. So that's what Orkney's heading for, is not net zero. This is decarbonisation of our energy system by 2030. And we think that's going to cost, in our island context, well over £200 million. And that's what we have to raise through the bank and to set up a system where we can circulate that money around the community. So as well as Orkney, we are looking at other locations. And one of the things that we were very keen to do was to make sure that the system we set up in Orkney had all the building blocks that would help it replicate into other areas. These maps of the UK and around the world show the communities and the businesses and the places where we've had contact and have developed activities already. And you can see there's quite a lot of places there. So the key is, as we prove that we can get the Reflex model working in Orkney, we then need to replicate it in other communities so that it has an impact and moves towards a wider decarbonisation process. So, why did we start on this journey? We started on this journey because we didn't feel that our existing energy system was helping us in Orkney. We were motivated to do something different. And as the criticality of the climate emergency has become more apparent, it basically, we had no option other than to act. We had to create something that in our mind's eye was going to help us as a community transition to decarbonisation. And we're really interested and committed to helping other people come on board and go on a similar journey. And basically what we're doing is meeting that challenge, if you like, that Greta set out for us in terms of, our house is burning, the status quo is not an option. So we need to get out there and do all of these things that are unbelievable, unimaginable, unthinkable, etc., etc. That's our challenge, all of our challenge. And we think that Reflex may help us achieve that. Thank you.
Gareth, it is so inspiring and it's breathtaking in the ambition and the scope that you have. And also so exciting to see it come to life. I mean, obviously this has been going on for years and years, and the way you've been pulling the elements together. And so this is a really exciting stage to have this quick conversation with you. I've got some great questions that are coming through now. So first off, you spoke about the Reflex Local model. In terms of community size that could participate in a local model, do you have a view as to how small or how large these communities could be?
Yeah, so when we've looked at this, we started off, I think, with some of the mantras that are associated with electricity supply driving us. And that kind of suggests that you need communities of around 100,000 people to make the energy stack up, as it were, because you've got a fixed overhead to run an energy business. But when we started looking at the fact that we weren't just supplying electricity, we were looking at transport, we're looking at heating and other forms of energy, that would suggest that you could actually work at a lower scale, if you like, because you've got more value coming from these other areas. And I think that coming from an island community of 22,000, obviously we needed a solution that worked at that level. It's probable that Orkney is a rather small to kick off with, but at least it makes it a bit more manageable as a kickoff location. So in essence, we haven't come up with a hard and fast limit. I think there is a degree of logical integration within the energy system. So there's geography that starts to lead towards areas where there's maybe common generation resources, a group of demand centers that are linked in one way or another, where there can be some trading. So I suspect that as you go across the world, that scale won't necessarily be the issue. It's more about an issue of geography, of where those systems make sense to have an integrated system. So that's a bit of a fudge answer, but we haven't got a minimum number, that's for sure.
That makes sense. And this ties nicely to the next question, which is possibly there's also a dimension in terms of community cohesiveness. So clearly Orkney is relatively small and it's a close-knit community. What ideas do you have in terms of next locations, in terms of getting communities engaged and on board? And that ties to a second question, which is, are there some places, therefore, that you think would be better places, quote unquote, to adopt the model than others?
Yeah. This is a really fascinating question around, where does communityness come from? And one of the conclusions that we've reached about a place like Orkney, and it's obviously an island, and what we've found is it's the unification of boundaries that make things easier in some way for Orkney, because everything that we're doing is organized on a similar boundary structure. So we know where Orkney begins and ends. When we go into other situations, particularly in mainland situations, continental situations, administrative boundaries, responsibility boundaries overlap, and that becomes a much more confused system. So there is a natural tendency to perhaps think that other islands would be good places to land Reflex, and we've got some advanced discussions going on in our neighbours in Shetland and the Western Isles, but also in other places. But interestingly, we have had quite a bit of uptake from mainland-based communities as well. And I think that what we would suggest is that if you need champions, you need people that are going to make this happen. This is what's happened in Orkney. So if you've got somebody who can sit on the Llyn Peninsula in Wales, where we've got people, and say, we want this to happen in our community, and they can pull 20 people around and say, yeah, we want to make this happen, that becomes a community in itself. Now, we might work with them to say, well, where's the natural edge to that community and into the next community? But I think it's around a nucleus. It's having people that want to make this transition work. First of all, that gives us a hub to work from. So I would say, there is no specific kind of tick that we have to go to kick this off, other than having somebody that's really interested in this. The other thing is, it could be a key business or an organization. If you have a large business in a rural location, or even in a city location, and they've got an energy demand and they're interested in decarbonisation, this could be led from a business or a local authority's perspective, as well as a community perspective.
Brilliant. And that actually ties in with a question I had here, which is there a natural champion in terms of creating this? What I hear is not necessarily. It could be a large company, it could be the council, it could be a community group.
Yeah, I think so. I think the key requirement is actually going back to that last slide. It's having an ability to think about the world of tomorrow in a different way from the world of yesterday. And so that may exist in a progressive organization, it may exist in a progressive group of people. But what Reflex is about is literally doing the unthinkable. This is stuff that, even 2 years ago, we thought this was going to be really difficult. COVID came along and showed us that really difficult becomes possible. So now this becomes absolutely the art of possible. So we need groups of people, whether they're in business, government, or in the community, that can see the future and see that change has to happen and want to be a part of that.
That's a great message, actually, this notion that this is possible, even given the breadth of ambition you have. Another question around, a lot of the focus was on the energy supply side. Do you, within this very broad mix of activity, are you also looking at energy efficiency measures and reducing energy consumption?
Absolutely. And, we all know the mantra that there's no point in putting, really efficient technology like a heat pump into a house if the heat from a house is leaking out through the windows and the roof. So that's absolutely a part of it. And so this energy bank idea is something that has to embrace that structure of the if you like, the building, if you like, that's using the energy, as well as the tools that are within it. Now, getting this capacity, the capital capacity to address things like energy efficiency and refurbishment of buildings is something that's a major challenge. And what we're doing there is reaching out to some of the established mechanisms through central government funded schemes, and we have a local charity in Orkney called Thor who are focused on addressing fuel poverty issues. So we see this as Reflex is teaming up with the existing mechanisms and embellishing them, and trying to help them or fill the gaps that are left by the existing system. So that's very much part of where we're heading, and it's a journey. You know, we're not the full baked cake, as it were, at the moment. We've just taken a few slices that get us started. But this is where the idea of membership becomes important, because if we get households that are engaged with Reflex, we might start off with an EV or a charger or a bit of solar on the roof, but we can develop that household or that business's capacity to decarbonize over time and work with them to do that.
I want to build on the point you just made related to the financing. And for investors, are there specific financial benefits potentially in participating in the system? And can I also tie in a related question, which is, you spoke about this energy bank. It might be nice just to clarify a little bit the role of that energy bank in terms of sourcing funds to address some of these needs.
Yeah, so if you like, in terms of the investment incentives, this is planned to be, if you like, a capital positive project, but it's designed to be, you know, at a modest, sustainable level. So it's an impact investment play, if you like. We're not going out to investors and saying, you will make the best return on your money that you could possibly have out of Reflex. What we're saying is, if you're interested in making a modest rate of return, say 10% on your capital, but you want to see that capital directly involved in decarbonisation, this is the investment for you. So it's that kind of deal where we're looking for people that are motivated to get some return on investment for a particular purpose, and that purpose is decarbonisation. So in terms of that energy bank idea, if we can attract investment as we are into that proposition, that investment might come from the community itself. It might be people within the community. We all actually invest in our energy system at the moment as paying consumers. You know, every pound that you give to your supplier at the moment is investing in your energy system's future. What we want to do is to tighten that up so that communities and householders and businesses have a direct link to the energy future that they're creating in their community, so that it doesn't go off to a distant center and then a small amount of it filter back to you. It's a much more direct link. And the attraction of renewables is that with things like battery storage and hydrogen and some of these storage and balancing mechanisms, we can see a much more distributed approach where we have nodes of energy capacity around the country that are serving each of our needs, rather than a huge system that's trying to match everybody's needs.
Fantastic. Can I ask another related question? This was talking, if you like, the capital side of the equation, but there's also clearly the people side. And how do you go about finding all the skills, you know, the people skills that you need to deliver this full spectrum? A lot of these things are new to all of us. And are there particular areas in terms of capability that you find difficult to fill? So
I mean, one of the reasons that we got the support in Orkney to kick this off is that we have a pretty well-established energy supply chain, and we know that that's a bit of a speciality that Orkney has in terms of sustainable energy systems. But what we're also aware of is that, you know, people have evolved into that over, okay, it's maybe taken us 10 or 20 years in Orkney to create that ecosystem of capacity, but it wasn't a birthright that we were going to be in that. So that creating these that capacity in other communities, we think, can be accelerated, it can be encouraged, it can be facilitated. It's not like some superpower that we've invented in Orkney. You basically just need to sit down and learn some stuff and apply yourself. And, you know, there's a lot of people that can and will and do contribute to this. So we don't see that there's any particular skills block. And this idea of Reflex Global having a resource pool, which is ideas and solutions that can then cascade down to each of the local companies, is designed to make that community-based development as simple as possible. But it's giving each community what they need rather than just imposing on them a kind of ready-baked solution.
And in terms of responding to what local communities need, you know, by design, everything is so interwoven. And yet we saw in your example, there's a spectrum of interest in terms of how customers participate in this. Is there a particular good place to start in building an integrated energy system, or does it really just depend very much on the people in the place?
I think, to be honest, there's two answers to that. One is we probably don't yet know the answer of where it's best to start because we're starting in one place. So I don't want to kind of overstate where we're at. I think what we've learned through that is that, and this is a learning process. So we started off believing that flexibility in supporting the grid was going to be a major, if you like, economic benefit to the energy system. And that was when we had this idea first about 2.5, 3 years ago, that was the key that was going to unlock the door to us. Ofgem, in their great wisdom, slammed that shut about 2 years ago or 18 months ago. So that first premise that we were going to be able to create wealth for the customer as well as the system through flexibility diminished largely. In parallel, what we saw was a burgeoning of our understanding about how transport was going to be an area. As I showed on some of the statistics, the money that we spend as householders and businesses on transport is a very significant part of the equation. So we've already learned that maybe flexibility is less important, but transport might be more important in our particular situation. I think in different geographies, that balance may alter, but what we're trying to do is to create the tools for each community to look at where the energy stack lies in their particular situation, look at the value distribution at the moment, and look at smart ways of developing that so that there's a decarbonized approach in the future.
Thank you. There's so many different dimensions to this. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but what I would encourage people to do is to get in touch with you and with Reflex about the specific angle or interests that they may have. I'm really excited not only by what you're doing, but the fact that it is something that's intentionally to be replicated and a local model that we can take out to other communities. So thank you for sharing your time and for your pioneering work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick, and thanks for hosting it. And thanks to everybody for coming in and listening to our story. It's great to be able to share it.
You're welcome.